Let me ask you something. How many times have you known what to do, but still didn't do it? Not because you're lazy, not because you're incapable, but because taking action feels heavy, uncomfortable, and exhausting. Here's the truth nobody tells you: action isn't supposed to feel painful. You just learned the wrong way to do it. Today, I'm going to show you how to stop forcing discipline, how to stop fighting yourself, and how to actually enjoy taking action so progress becomes automatic, not a battle. Most people believe that one day they're going to wake up and feel ready. They think motivation is something that arrives first, like a green light from the universe that says, okay, now you can move. And so they wait. They wait to feel confident. They wait to feel inspired. They wait to feel less scared, less tired, less unsure. And what they don't realize is that waiting is the exact reason they feel stuck in the first place. Here's the truth most people never learn: motivation is not the cause of action. Action is the cause of motivation. You don't get energized and then start moving. You start moving and energy shows up. Think about it. On the days you don't want to work out, the hardest part isn't the workout. It's putting your shoes on. Once you start moving, once your body is in motion, something shifts. Your mind catches up. That's how the brain works. It responds to movement, not intentions. Your brain is designed to conserve energy. Its number one job is to keep you safe and comfortable. So when you think about taking action on something unfamiliar, starting that project, making that call, having that conversation, your brain immediately looks for reasons to stop you. It tells you you're not ready yet. It tells you you need more information. It tells you tomorrow will be better. But those thoughts aren't truth. They're just your brain trying to protect you from uncertainty. And here's where most people get it wrong. They listen to those thoughts and assume they mean something. They assume fear means stop. They assume discomfort means something is wrong. In reality, fear and discomfort are just signals that you're about to grow. The problem isn't that you feel resistance. The problem is that you've been taught to wait for resistance to disappear before you move. That never happens. Confidence doesn't come before action. Confidence is a side effect of keeping promises to yourself. Every time you take action when you don't feel like it, you send a message to your brain: I'm the type of person who moves anyway. That message builds trust. That trust becomes confidence. But if you keep waiting to feel confident first, you never give yourself the chance to earn it. Think about a child learning to walk. They don't wait until they feel ready. They stand up, they fall, they get back up, and they try again. They don't question whether they're good enough to walk. They don't analyze it for months. They act. Somewhere along the way, we unlearned that. We started overthinking instead of moving. We started trying to feel our way into action instead of acting our way into feeling. Motivation is like a muscle. It only shows up when you use it. If you wait for it, it gets weaker. If you act without it, it gets stronger. That's why action creates clarity. That's why action creates energy. That's why action creates momentum. Momentum doesn't come from thinking. It comes from doing something even when it's imperfect. And here's the part that really changes everything. You don't need massive action to unlock motivation. You need zany action. The brain doesn't care how big the step is. It cares that you moved. One email, one page, 1 minute, one rep. Once you start, the hardest part is already done. Movement quiets doubt. Stillness amplifies it. The reason taking action feels so heavy for so many people because they're trying to think their way into feeling different. But feelings follow behavior, not the other way around. If you want to feel motivated, act motivated. If you want to feel confident, act confident. If you want to feel disciplined, act disciplined, especially when you don't feel like it. Stop asking yourself, do I feel ready? And start asking, what's the smallest action I can take right now? Because readiness is built in motion. Motivation is built in motion. The life you want is built in motion. So don't wait for the feeling. Be the movement and let the feeling catch up. Most people don't actually hate taking action. What they hate is the pressure they attach to it. The moment you decide that every action has to lead to a specific result, action stops feeling light and starts feeling heavy. Suddenly, every step has weight. Every move feels like a test. And when action feels like a test, your brain looks for ways to avoid it. Think about how often you say things like, this has to work, or I can't mess this up, or if I fail, it means something about me. That's not motivation. That's fear wearing a productivity costume. When you tie your self-worth to the outcome, action becomes stressful instead of exciting. You're no longer acting to grow. You're acting to prove yourself. And proving yourself is exhausting. Here's the shift that changes everything. Stop measuring success by the outcome and start measuring it by your willingness to show up. Outcomes are delayed. They're unpredictable. They're influenced by things you can't control. But effort is immediate. Effort is always available. When you fall in love with effort, action becomes something you can win at every single day. The reason athletes and artists can spend hours practicing without burning out isn't because they're obsessed with trophies or applause. It's because they enjoy the process of getting better. They enjoy the repetition. They enjoy the challenge. They enjoy the craft. When you focus on mastery instead of results, action stops being a means to an end and starts becoming the reward itself. Most people quit not because they fail, but because they're impatient. They take action for a short period of time, don't see instant results, and assume it's not working. But growth is often invisible before it's obvious. You don't see muscles forming after one workout. You don't see confidence building after one uncomfortable conversation. But something is always happening beneath the surface. Detaching from the outcome allows you to stay consistent long enough for results to catch up. When you obsess over outcomes, every delay feels like rejection. Every setback feels personal. But when you commit to the process, setbacks become feedback. They become part of the game. You stop asking, why isn't this working? And start asking, what can I learn from this? That question keeps you moving instead of stuck. Here's another truth: the outcome-focused mindset keeps you living in the future, and the future is where anxiety lives. The process lives in the present, and the present is where power is. When you focus on what you're doing right now, this sentence, this call, you bring your nervous system out of stress mode and into execution mode. Action feels calmer when it's anchored in the moment instead of a distant result. And let's be honest, most of the outcomes you're afraid of never even happen. You imagine failure, rejection, embarrassment, or disappointment, and your brain reacts as if it's already real. But when you focus on the process, your mind has less room to create those stories. You're too busy doing the work. Detaching from the outcome doesn't mean you stop caring about results. It means you stop letting results control your behavior. You still have goals, you still have direction, but your identity isn't dependent on whether things go perfectly. Your identity is built on consistency, on showing up, on doing the work even when no one is watching. This is where action starts to feel enjoyable. Not because it's easy, but because it's honest. You're no longer negotiating with the future version of yourself. You're no longer placing your happiness on a finish line that keeps moving. You're grounded in the act of becoming better. When you learn to enjoy the process, discipline becomes sustainable. You stop starting and stopping. You stop needing external validation to keep going. Progress becomes something you experience daily, not something you're waiting for someday. So let go of the outcome just long enough to fall in love with the work, and you'll be amazed at how far you go. One of the biggest reasons people struggle to take action isn't because they're incapable. It's because they're trying to do too much too fast. They set goals that sound inspiring but feel overwhelming, and then they wonder why they keep procrastinating. The truth is, your brain isn't afraid of work. It's afraid of failure, embarrassment, and emotional overload. When a task feels too big, your nervous system interprets it as a threat, and avoidance becomes the default response. That's why shrinking the action is so powerful. When you make the next step small enough, you bypass fear. You lower the emotional risk. Your brain relaxes because the task no longer feels dangerous. And once the brain feels safe, movement becomes possible. Most people think they need more discipline to take action, but what they really need is less pressure. Think about how often you've said, "I'll start when I have more time," or "I'll do when I can do it properly." That's not logic. It's avoidance dressed up as responsibility. Perfection is just procrastination with good branding. When you wait for the perfect moment, the perfect plan, or the perfect version of yourself, you stay stuck exactly where you are. Progress doesn't require big leaps, it requires consistency. And consistency is built on actions that feel easy enough to repeat. The mistake most people make is trying to motivate themselves with massive goals instead of designing small actions they can actually follow through on. Your brain loves completion. Every time you finish something, even something small, you get a hit of momentum. That momentum builds confidence, and confidence fuels more action. Here's something important to understand: starting creates clarity. You don't need to know all 10 steps to move forward. You only need to know the next one. When you shrink the action, you stop trying to solve the entire future and start dealing with the present. That's when overwhelm disappears. If you want to build a habit, don't focus on intensity, focus on frequency. 1 push-up a day beats 0 workouts a week. 1 paragraph beats no writing. 5 minutes beats someday. Small actions done consistently outperform big actions done occasionally. The goal isn't to impress yourself. The goal is to prove to your brain that you can be trusted. This also changes the way failure feels. When the action is small, failure isn't catastrophic. It's information. You can adjust without feeling defeated. You can show up again without needing to recover emotionally. That's how momentum is protected. Most people think they need to feel inspired to take action, but inspiration usually shows up after you've already started. Shrinking the action makes starting so easy that inspiration becomes unnecessary. You remove the drama. You remove the negotiation. You just move. And once you're in motion, something interesting happens. You often do more than you planned. You tell yourself you'll work for 5 minutes, and suddenly it's been 30. Not because you forced yourself, but because starting removed the resistance. Action has a way of pulling you forward once you step into it. This is how you build trust with yourself. You stop making grand promises you don't keep, and you start making small promises you actually follow through on. Over time, your self-image changes. You stop seeing yourself as someone who procrastinates and start seeing yourself as someone who shows up. That identity shift is powerful. Remember, your brain doesn't need you to be heroic. It needs you to be consistent. Shrink the action until it feels almost laughably easy. That's not weakness, that's strategy. That's how you create progress that lasts. Make the step so small you can't talk yourself out of it, and let momentum do the rest. Most people try to change their lives by focusing on what they need to do, but lasting change doesn't come from to-do lists. It comes from identity. The strongest force driving your behavior isn't motivation or discipline, it's who you believe you are. Every action you take is a vote for the type of person you think you are, and every action you avoid reinforces that story too. Think about the language you use with yourself. You don't say, "I'm not working out today." You say, "I'm not a workout person." You don't say, "I didn't write today." You say, "I'm not creative." Those statements aren't facts, they're identities. And once an identity is formed, the brain works overtime to prove it right. You don't resist action because you're lazy, you resist action because it doesn't match the story you've been telling yourself. This is why forcing action through willpower rarely lasts. You can push yourself for a week or two, but if the behavior doesn't align with your identity, you'll eventually snap back to what feels familiar. Real change happens when action becomes an expression of who you are, not something you have to negotiate with yourself about every day. Instead of asking, "What do I need to do today?" start asking, "What would the person I want to become do today?" That shift changes everything. You stop seeing action as a chore and start seeing it as alignment. You're not working out to get in shape. You're acting like someone who takes care of their body. You're not learning a skill to prove your worth. You're acting like someone who values growth. Here's the key: identity is built through evidence. You don't decide who you are and magically become that person. You act first, and the identity follows. Every small action you take is a piece of proof. One workout doesn't make you fit, but it makes you someone who works out. One difficult conversation doesn't make you confident, but it makes you someone who doesn't avoid discomfort. Over time, those actions stack and the identity becomes undeniable. This also removes pressure. When you focus on identity, you're no longer chasing perfection. You're just casting votes. You don't need to be flawless, you just need to be consistent. Missing a day doesn't destroy your identity. Quitting does. You get back on track not because you feel guilty, because that's what this version of you does. Action becomes easier when it's tied to identity because the brain craves consistency. It wants your behavior to match your self-image. When there's a mismatch, discomfort shows up. You can use that discomfort as fuel. Instead of asking, do I feel like doing this? You ask, was this who I am? That question cuts through excuses fast. This is also why shrinking the action matters so much. Small actions are easier to repeat, and repetition is what builds identity. You don't need to transform your entire life to become a different person. You just need to show up in small ways, repeatedly. Identity isn't built in moments of intensity, it's built in moments of consistency. And when action aligns with identity, enjoyment naturally follows. You stop feeling like you're forcing yourself. You stop feeling like you're fighting your nature. You start feeling like you're becoming more of who you already are at your best. That's a powerful feeling. You don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your identity. So stop asking what you need to do and start acting like who you've decided to become. Most people unknowingly train their brain to avoid action. Not because they're lazy, but because of how they define success. If the only time you allow yourself to feel good is when you win, achieve, or get the result you want, then action becomes risky. Your brain starts to associate effort with emotional danger. Why try if there's a chance you won't succeed? Why start if the reward is uncertain? The brain is simple. It repeats what gets rewarded and avoids what feels painful. If you only celebrate outcomes, you're teaching your brain that effort without immediate success isn't worth it. And since outcomes are delayed and unpredictable, motivation slowly disappears. Over time, procrastination isn't a character flaw, it's a learned response. This is where everything shifts. You have to reward the behavior, not the result. Showing up is the win, effort is the win. Taking action when it's uncomfortable is the win. When you start acknowledging yourself for trying, your brain begins to associate action with positive emotion. And once action feels good, consistency becomes natural. Think about how often you dismiss your effort. You say things like, it doesn't count because I didn't finish, or it wasn't good enough, or I should have done more. Every time you do that, you take away the reward. You're telling your brain, this wasn't worth it. And the brain listens. Now imagine doing the opposite. Imagine finishing a workout and saying, I showed up today. Imagine sending one email and saying, I kept my word. Imagine spending 10 focus minutes and saying, that matters. That's not lowering your standards. That's reinforcing the behavior that leads to higher standards over time. Children naturally understand this. They get praised for effort. They're encouraged for trying. That's why they're willing to fail over and over again while learning something new. As adults, we remove that encouragement and replace it with criticism. We expect perfection and punish ourselves for progress. And then we wonder why action feels so heavy. When you reward effort, you remove fear from the equation. You're no longer afraid of failing because you've already succeeded by showing up. This creates psychological safety. And when the mind feels safe, it's more willing to take risks, try again, and push a little further. This also changes how you respond to setbacks. Instead of quitting after a bad day, you come back faster. Instead of spiraling into self-judgment, you reset. You stop seeing consistency as perfection and start seeing it as resilience. And resilience is what actually creates long-term success. The reward doesn't have to be big or dramatic. It can be as simple as acknowledging yourself, taking a moment of pride, or doing something small you enjoy after completing the action. What matters is the association. You're teaching your brain action leads to something good. Over time, this rewires your motivation system. You stop relying on external pressure. You stop needing fear or urgency to move. Action becomes internally driven because it feels rewarding on its own. You don't have to force discipline. It shows up naturally. And here's the most important part. When you reward effort consistently, you start trusting yourself. You stop breaking promises to yourself. You stop living in guilt. You build a relationship with yourself based on respect instead of criticism. That relationship is the foundation of confidence. Enjoying action isn't about being excited all the time. It's about creating an environment where effort feels safe, valued, and meaningful. When effort is rewarded, action becomes sustainable. Celebrate the effort, and the results will take care of themselves. At the end of the day, this isn't about forcing yourself to be more disciplined or pushing harder than you already have. It's about changing the relationship you have with action itself. When you stop waiting to feel ready, when you let go of being obsessed with outcomes, when you make the action small enough to start, when you act from identity, and when you reward yourself for showing up, action stops feeling like resistance and starts feeling like momentum. You don't need a new personality. You don't need more willpower. You need a new approach, one where movement comes first, progress is measured in effort, and consistency matters more than perfection. That's how action becomes enjoyable. That's how growth becomes sustainable. And that's how your life actually starts to change. So stop overthinking the next step. Take it, then take the next one, keep moving, because the version of you that you want to become is built in motion, not in waiting.